Path Radio, your number one online Islamic talk station.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You're listening to Middle Path Radio. I'm Kamal Hussein. Thank you for joining us and welcome to this evening's Straight Talk. Let me start by telling you a few scenarios. Imagine your teenage son was taken away from his class by two Prevent officers and started interrogating him, asking him if he was affiliated with ISIS. Imagine your 7-year-old daughter coming home and saying, "Shall I tell my friends that I'm not a Muslim?" Because she is worried her friends might call her names or label her. How would you react as a parent? What is creating this atmosphere of fear? Is this a result of government counterterrorism strategy? How does it impact the Muslim community in the UK? To discuss this pressing issue, we have with us tonight a distinguished panel of experts. I would like to welcome our guest in the studio. Assalamu alaikum. Okay, so we have Brother Wakil Ahmed, who is a solicitor in London, also closely engaged in local community issues. And we have Brother Mamun Rahman, who is our regular contributor to this show and a secondary school teacher. And we have, alhamdulillah, we have a special guest, Sister Ibtihal Basis, who will be joining us on the phone, inshallah. She is a mother of 4 and a barrister by profession. Ibtihal has had extensive experience in advising the Muslim community and private independent schools on the counterterrorism laws and prevent policies. She has delivered CTS workshops all over UK, alhamdulillah. She has also written a number of articles and has produced a short film about prevent. Also a former presenter on Islam Channel and has been a guest on BBC Radio 4 and Press TV, amongst other media outlets. We are very fortunate to have her with us tonight, alhamdulillah. So you can take part in this important discussion. Call or text 07477080248, or you can tweet us at Middle Path Radio, which is all one word, inshallah. So let me start with Sister Ibtihal. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you for joining us.
Wa iyyakum. Alhamdulillah, it's a pleasure to join you here tonight.
Jazakallah khair. Let me start by asking, what is prevent strategy? Can you provide a brief background for our listeners? Also, can you explain the difference between counterterrorism strategy, CTS, and prevent?
Well, the Counter-Terrorism and Security Act encompasses the prevent strategy.
Okay.
The prevent strategy is a strategy which effectively, as they say it, is a means of stopping or preventing people from being drawn into terrorism. And it's embodied in Part 5 of the Counter-Terrorism and Security Act 2015, which became law in February of 2015 this year. And it basically gives a statutory duty to particular public bodies, such as schools, such as the council, such as social services, to look out for what they call are signs of radicalization in children. And they are under a duty to refer or to report those children to the police. Is it particularly
just for the schools and universities, or does it obviously doctors and other professions are also giving that?
Right. Yeah. That's right. So the public bodies include the health service, the National Health Service, whether you're a nurse, a doctor, and you're supposed to report not just on patients, but even your colleagues.
Wow.
Basically, the prevent strategy just surrounds Muslims in every aspect of their life, whether they work in the private sector, because we all visit our GPs occasionally, we have children in schools, or we work we will have dealings with social services. Or whether you work in those services, it is a way of monitoring Muslims in whatever sector or whatever lifestyle that they have.
Okay. The government wants to curb radicalization of young Muslims, spotting it at an early age. Isn't that a good thing, though? Because we did have the 3 girls running off to Syria to join ISIS.
Yes. We also understand that the 3 girls who ran off to Syria, their head teacher was before a Home Affairs committee who are actually looking at prevent. And he actually specifically said that the prevent strategy had no impact, according to him, as to whether those girls ran off or not. Well, look, we have to start from the point of, do we believe that the Muslim community are people who can be easily radicalized? That there is a problem of radicalization within them, that effectively we are a problem community. And I don't think we should be starting from that starting point, because if you're going to apply that to the Muslim community, you should apply that to every single community that has particular people that commit crime. For example, yesterday, I understand that there was a white man who was caught with a bomb in Preston. Did we hear much about that? Are all white men now subject to radicalization? Do we have a prevent strategy for them?
We didn't receive that on the main news. We didn't hear anything. I mean, that wasn't something publicized.
No, we didn't. No, we didn't.
So you know the 3 girls that run away to Syria. You're saying they want nothing to do with prevent. So how were they radicalized then?
Well, this is a question that remains still open to an answer at the moment. But look, if you are now telling Muslim parents that they should not be talking about ISIS, that they cannot have a view on foreign policy, that they cannot discuss Islam with it is really just basic things like prayer and hijab that children are being reported for, never mind all the other stuff that I'm hearing about daily, incidentally, about children who are just discussing Islam. If you're telling them that you should be afraid to talk about that, and then you've got on the other side a group who says, look, you are welcome here, we will look after you, we will do this for you, we will do that for you, and no one's addressing any of the questions that these youth may have. Where do we think that the youth are going to end up going? Where do we think that they're going to, and whose clutches and whose hands are they going to be in if parents are too scared and too intimidated to discuss these issues with their children? And quite frankly, our imams are too scared, our mosques are too scared, are intimidated into a position where they can't discuss.
Well, that's one of the opinions, isn't it? That look, because the imams, our parents, we can't discuss with our kids. The kids are actually going online and being radicalized. Is that the case?
Well, I think it's a lot more complicated than that. I think it's a lot more complex. I think we have to start holding certain people accountable. Look, what is going on at the moment is not about ideology. They keep talking about ideology. I think, quite frankly, that is a very dangerous starting point. You have to really consider, it's more about people being fed up, people not feeling heard, people not feeling that they are being treated equally and justly. I think the government really needs to look at its own foreign policy and what they're doing at the moment in Syria. I think we have particular questions about that. But of course, if you raise these questions that you are an extremist, you are divisive, you are someone who is a radicalizer, that's effectively the position we're in.
So you can't really link to foreign policy and say, look, these guys are radicalized because of foreign policy. If you were to say that, then you're, obviously you're an extremist. Yeah.
I think effectively yes, that's effectively what's happening. That if you start pointing to foreign policy, you could be someone, and I do know this, you could be someone who could be accused of being divisive and someone who's radicalizing people, which is a nonsense. And quite frankly, the prevent strategy is based on no evidence. There's no empirical evidence whatsoever that suggests that, first of all, that there is ideology is the problem, and somehow Islamism, as they put it, or Islam really, is the problem. They've got no empirical evidence. They've got no evidence, and yet they've been able to roll out training for this for 500,000 of their public servants. I mean, it's beyond ridiculous. It's actually harmful, dangerous, toxic. All the things that, people have accused it of being, and I'm talking about police commissioners such as Peter Fahy, who said that we are now turning into a thought police. He's responsible. He was overseeing prevent. We are in danger of becoming a police state, he said, and we are now in danger of becoming thought police. I mean, if these very people are saying that, what chances has prevent got of actually being taken seriously?
So what would you replace with prevent if we assume that you want to scrap it?
I don't think there's anything that should be replaced. I think what needs to happen is that people need to have a better understanding. I'm talking about the wider public.
So do you not think that they should scrap prevent altogether?
I think it should be scrapped. I also think this government needs to be scrapped as well. I mean, I can't think of a more toxic and more divisive government. I think that the government is if anybody's radicalizing, they're the ones that are radicalizing. I think this whole thing needs to be opened up to a more honest discussion, to more open discussion.
Okay.
I mean, it seems to be that ISIS is responsible for everything.
Yeah.
And anything nowadays, and Bashar al-Assad gets away with committing 98% of the crimes that are happening in Syria at the moment.
Yeah, so
nobody's...
no, that's fine. I'll let you finish. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was saying nobody supports ISIS, but the way the government is dealing with 7-month-old babies, I'm talking about a child that was recently taken from the clutches of his mother for showing signs of radicalization, a 7-month-old baby. This is what we're talking about now, that children have become would-be criminals, that we are all potential ISIS personnel. Why? Because we believe in a way of life, we believe in Islam, that doesn't fit in with their moderate reformist agenda that they have. And I really do believe that the government is all out to get us all to believe in a state-sponsored Islam, quite frankly.
Well, Islamism, according to the government, is clearly a risk. ISIS is clearly a risk. The government have a duty to protect the public and the youth from such an issue, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I don't think... How are you protecting the public by criminalizing 7-month-old babies? How are you saying that this is about ISIS when you're criminalizing children for asking for a prayer room, for criminalizing a 7-year-old girl who comes in hijab and then is asked questions about what she's reading at home, for asking children in madrasas how much of the Quran are they actually reciting on a daily basis? This is actually happening. These are things that are actually happening. I mean, I had a 7-year-old boy who was sat at a lesson being given by his teacher about ISIS. Mm-hmm. Then he didn't know who ISIS were.
So why would the teacher speak to a 7-year-old boy about ISIS?
They're actually giving lessons in citizenship classes about ISIS. We have to know, and they're not informing. These are wholly age inappropriate and wholly inappropriate. Yeah. But they are giving these lessons. And they are teaching children. I mean, I can tell you children that have come to them and said, "Mom, am I a terrorist?" Yeah. And these are 4-5-year-old children asking their mothers. Teachers who have said inappropriate things to our Muslim children. Teaching assistants who have done the same thing. One teaching assistant actually said to a child, yes, Muslims are terrorists, but you're probably not one. I mean, how outrageous. This is what the PREVENT strategy is doing. It's creating an atmosphere of Islamophobia that is state-sponsored. And as one sister beautifully put it, she said, this is state-sanctioned child abuse. The state is allowing the abuse of our children, psychologically, physically. A lot of our children are actually being beaten up in the playground now for just being Muslim.
Wow. Is this what... Because a lot of the times you get that within the Muslim majority areas, you don't hear that so much, because obviously some of the teachers are Muslims. And where my son goes, obviously a lot of the teachers are Muslims, so we don't hear so much. But I'm assuming that it's the outskirts of London, maybe.
Well, you'll be surprised that PREVENT money is going into 25 constituencies.
Wow. And
those 25 constituencies are predominantly Muslim. So we have places like Tower Hamlets, which has a very strong PREVENT presence. Mm-hmm. That certainly does. And you may not get... And the training of what's called RAP now, which is anti-radicalization of strategy linked to the PREVENT strategy. PREVENT officers would like to come in and speak to the Muslim children without knowledge in Islamic schools being investigated after the whole blowback from Trojan Horse, even though the committee found no evidence of radicalization in the Birmingham schools. I mean, it's just one thing after another. It's beginning to be a domino effect. But the Muslim populated areas are feeling it, and they are being hit hard. And a lot of the time, the parents do not know because they're not maybe actively involved, they're not governors. But we are being hit hard, and they're coming after our children.
What would you advise? What would you advise Muslims who have been approached by PREVENT to
get in? I know it sounds really tacky, and I know. Get in touch with a lawyer, and not just any lawyer. We're not talking about just a criminal lawyer. Get in touch with a human rights lawyer. Ask them how expert they are on PREVENT. Have they had any dealings with Prevent officers? Have they had any similar cases? And do not speak to Prevent officers unless you.
So every school will have a Prevent officer, isn't it?
Well, every school would have been approached by Prevent, would have had training by Prevent, but that doesn't mean that they are entitled to speak to your child in your absence, and that doesn't mean that they're entitled to just come to your house, which they so often do now, and ask to speak to you. You don't have to let them in. You don't even have to answer the door. Wow. Unless they have a warrant for your arrest, unless they have a warrant to enter your premises, you do not have to speak to them.
But can they take your child away in school and discuss, and interrogate them? Because there has been many cases, isn't it?
No, they're not. Because I think, in my mind, what they're doing is that they are investigating a crime, and that, in my mind, should raise alarms about. Well, that child is entitled to have an appropriate adult present. They're entitled to legal advice. Mm-hmm. They're entitled to speak. They're entitled to know what the so-called case is against them, because sometimes it can be something as. I had one child tell their teacher, that they'd had a dream about fireworks, and I don't know how the teacher came to the conclusion that there were guns in his house, and then the police were called, and ridiculous. That child was interviewed.
Wow.
It is ridiculous. It is ridiculous, but it's dangerous and it's frightening and it's intimidating. So it is a police state for us as Muslims. I say that without any hesitation.
So some of the advice that you gave may make some Muslims feel that they may actually be making things worse for themselves. What do you think?
I think that Muslims that feel that they, if they say anything, they'll be causing more trouble. You are the very people that Prevent will target.
Yeah.
They will see you as a soft target and they will use you as an example. We have to get tough. We have to be outspoken. Number of occasions where we have got tough and we've managed to railroad them into silence because their strategy is based on no evidence. Their training is ludicrous. It goes beyond, it's almost laughable if it wasn't so dangerous.
Because we did have parents who said, look, I don't want to go in because I just don't want to make things worse, because what if they think that I'm some kind of extremist? That is creating that fear within the Muslim community, isn't it?
As far as I can see from the cases that I've been referred, everybody is an extremist. If a little girl who's 7 can be referred because she wants to wear hijab, if a woman can be asked at her workplace why she suddenly decided to go to Hajj, if a doctor can be questioned by his colleagues as to why he's giving charity to Syria, and then an email is sent around by Prevent saying, if you know anybody that does this, you should tip them off, then we are all extremists.
Yeah,
and to not speak out is a disservice. We must all hang on to our Islamic values. I think before,
especially Christmas is coming up, and a lot of the time they are, throwing out these parties. I remember I used to not go to the parties, and they used to say, "Oh, you're weird." But now I'm just thinking, if I didn't attend any of the parties, they'll think, look, this guy has some extreme tendencies.
Well, would you believe that in some schools they have a duty to report any parent who takes their child out of the nativity play?
Wow.
Or, a visit by Santa Claus. And we have to be aware, what is the Prevent policy? You have to ask the schools, and you're entitled to know that is still your right, and that is your child, and you still have particular pieces of legislation that protect that right. But also we have an Islamic responsibility to protect our children, to teach them our deen without fear. We have to think of also Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Did he remain quiet when they intimidated and they tried to humiliate him, and sometimes they were violent as well? Did he remain quiet, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? No, he didn't. And we all want our children to be better Muslims than us, but if we're telling them to shush, and if we're not teaching them Islam, and if we feel intimidated, what kind of Muslims will our children learn to be? And that is on our neck. That is our responsibility.
Absolutely.
So hold on to your Islamic. It's not illegal to be a Muslim yet.
Yeah.
And it will become illegal if we remain silent. If we remain silent about it.
So finally, what would your advice be to our community, and how can they safeguard Islam and our youth?
I think knowledge is very important. So on a personal one-to-one level, I would say to people, go and find out what your Prevent policy is all about. Speak to the teachers and speak to them about Islam. But more importantly, I think this is now a time for empowering yourself by uniting. So I always tell people to try set up parent coalitions. Okay. Do try and get on the governorship. Speak to teachers. A lot of them are not racist. A lot of them are very, very uncomfortable with Prevent. I know the National Union of Teachers are very uncomfortable. They see it for what it is. A number of non-Muslim teachers I've spoken to are not happy with Prevent. You'll find that there will be a number of listening ears. So do go out and empower yourself, unify, and don't let your child down by remaining silent.
Be active, really, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. You have to be. I have seen people that for years I've been speaking to them about this, that, and the other, and haven't moved a single step. I can't believe how people are coming together now. I know in Waltham Forest there's some excellent work. There's an event there tonight as we're speaking about Prevent. So I think we have to become active. We have to hold on to our Islamic values. We have to protect our children and their deen. It's our responsibility in front of Allah. So ultimately, we know we're going to be facing Allah on that day.
Before you go, how can people contact you? I mean, to seek your advice and maybe support any campaigns that you're doing.
Inshallah, if they call you, brother, you can give my.
Do you have your own practice? Would you like to maybe just?
I do have my own practice. I work in a chambers called Armanas Chambers. Okay. And if anybody wants the details of that, they can contact you. And please get in touch with lawyers. They're happy to speak to you. To begin with, we don't charge initially for consultation. We give advice. And if we need to get involved, hopefully we won't need to get involved. But generally, it's just a chat to empower people. So please speak to lawyers. There are lots and lots of lawyers who are on board to help people against this toxic brand.
Fantastic.
As one police commissioner called
Fantastic. Jazakallah khair for coming in, and I hope you can join us again in the future.
Inshallah,
okay, then. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
Okay, back to the studio, brothers. Some really good points and advice from our sister Ibtihal. So, brothers, before we go to the brothers, please ring in or you can text. Our number is 074 77 080 248. Inshallah. So let's back to the studio. So what are your, what are the dangers you see from the Prevent? And do you agree with what the sisters presented?
A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. This is Brother Wakil.
Thank you, Brother Kamal, for inviting me to your show. It's a privilege and a pleasure to share a few moments with your listeners. I have listened to Sister Ibtihal, and I have a lot of respect for her. She is an expert on Prevent. As I see it, Prevent is yes, it's underpinned by law since February this year. As Sister Ibtihal put it, the Counter-Terrorism and Security Act, which came into effect in February 2015. It is underpinned by law. But I do want to go back a step, because history didn't begin with 2015. So I would go back to Prevent when it was initially started back in 2011. So Prevent started off in 2011 when the coalition government started this agenda. And even you can
Conservatives,
the Conservative and the Liberal Democrats. That's right, thank you. But it goes back even further. It goes back to the Blair days when there was a program called Contest. So Prevent was actually part of the original Contest, and again, some of your listeners.
Was it developed from Contest?
It's essentially been an evolution from Contest, because the government had, under the Blair era, initiated a program to tackle Muslims who they considered to be potentially going down a violent route. So, what is Prevent, as you asked the previous speaker? Prevent, as David Cameron has put it, is, well, he says it is designed to prevent people from going down the radicalized violent extremism route. But it is a lot more than that. Prevent, in my view, is, and actually I will make statements from Cameron himself. Prevent is all about secularizing and reforming Islam. And it is to ensure that Muslims, especially the next generation, becomes secularized and so that Abdullah is no different from Jonathan and Joshua. As far as the government is concerned, that is the route that they are going under. Now, let's refer to David Cameron. He, in October 2015, only 2 months ago, launched what he calls the counter-extremism strategy. Now, it sounds very jargonistic, and you would be forgiven for thinking there must be a problem in the Muslim community. Well, there isn't, because his agenda isn't a genuine agenda. He has a very sinister agenda. Now, let's look at what the counter-extremism strategy seeks to achieve. David Cameron said, "It is a fight against Islamist extremism. I believe it is one of the greatest struggles of our generation." Now, he is saying that his government's struggle against Islam is a generational struggle. And what is that struggle? David Cameron gave a speech in May this year, just after the election.
Is it the Manchester speech?
No, there was a Birmingham speech, which I will refer to in a moment. There was a Birmingham speech in July, which is, I think, a type of a policy statement. But let's look at Cameron's speech, which he gave, where he describes what he calls extremism. And this is what Cameron had to say. Quote, "You don't have to support violence to subscribe to certain intolerant ideas, which create a climate in which extremists can flourish. Ideas which are hostile to basic liberal values such as democracy, freedom, and sexual equality. Ideas which actively promote discrimination, sectarianism, and segregation." End of quote. What I get from this statement is that he will consider extreme if any Muslim was to disagree with things like sexual promiscuity. If a Muslim was to say in an Islamic wedding, men and women should sit in two different halls and eat in different halls.
Yeah. Well, that's the case, isn't it?
Absolutely. These are established principles which Muslims have practiced for hundreds of years. So what Cameron is saying is any Muslim who says he is not comfortable about mixing with the opposite gender, then that Muslim is essentially an extremist. Any Muslim who says he believes in the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Sharia law, he is potentially an extremist.
Or any Muslim who says Islam is the correct, is the truth, and everything else is falsehood. Is he an extremist?
Well, that is a definite extreme comment as far as David Cameron is concerned. So does it make us all extremists then? Potentially, as far as the government is concerned, anybody who disagrees and questions the government's policy these days is a potential extremist. And as Cameron said recently, referring to Jeremy Corbyn, he said people like him are terrorist sympathizers. And, this guy, with whom I have my disagreements, but Jeremy Corbyn was, of course, opposing the attack on Syria. And you can see how the government was using very emotive and quite dangerous language to refer to people like Alex Salmond of the Scottish Nationalist Party, Jeremy Corbyn, referring to them as terrorist sympathizers. So you can see the government's agenda is quite toxic and quite dangerous.
So how does it affect our community, in particular the schools, colleges, and the evening madrasas? I mean, Brother Mahmoud, you can come in if you want. I know you're looking at me.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa
I've just been remaining quiet today. I thought, let me actually let Brother Wakil, do the talking.
Mom, you work in the community. I mean, you're a teacher, so you have first-hand experience in terms of, seeing the prevent officers. I mean, do you have prevent officers in your school?
Yeah, there are definitely, prevent officers in school.
Can I just ask, are they Muslims?
Not necessarily, is what I'm saying. As I said also, this prevent thing is actually prevent CTS or whatever you want to call it, contest. These names are probably, new nowadays. But it doesn't mean that those actions behind those names didn't actually occur before. I actually remember one of my cousins actually used to go to primary school, and his age was about, let's say, 9 or 10. He actually
was that recent?
No, this is not recent. This is actually about 15 or 20 years ago.
Okay.
Remember those days when some of the Islamic groups were really active in the road? There was a lot of debates and discussions in the university. So this little child, when he went to primary school, he actually wrote Khilafah on his, exercise book. His exercise book.
That was 20 years ago.
20 years ago. His exercise book was confiscated, by the school staff. And this was in a primary school. And later, few days later, his book, some people from outside met him and interviewed him. And they said that, where did you learn this word from? How do you know about this word? So the threat about, Islam or Islamic values existed even long time ago. But what we can see at the moment is that the government is very vocal and very open about, what its intentions are. I know Ibtihal and Brother Wakil has actually mentioned, what's government's definition of some of these words are. But I have also a definition that the government has given. And the government has said that extremism or the prevent strategy as vocal or active opposition to fundamental British values, including democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, and mutual respect and tolerance of different faiths and beliefs. So when the government talks about tolerance, like Brother Wakil was saying, that you have to accept all strata, every types of belief. You have to accept them, that they are, right. You should not actually.
So where
talk
does
against
freedom
them.
of speech come in?
So freedom of speech, these are fundamental British values. You see, the government actually packages them as fundamental.
Now, the point I'm saying, the government said, look, they need to hold on to the British values.
Yes.
Isn't freedom of expression is that a British value?
It is a British value, but the thing is, like, we saw in Algeria, for example, as long as, British values is protected, we will also, the government will have no qualms in actually letting people speak freely. But if British values is threatened, because you speak of something that threatens these British values, whether it's democracy or individual liberty, then that, freedom of expression is actually, countered or actually spoken against. And they will actually, they will say that, look, you may be an extremist today, or you may be vocally speaking against the British values today, but they also say that you may be a conveyor belt in the later stage, which may be, which you may actually get involved in, violence.
So is it true the more Islamic a person is, the more likely they would be radicalized? Because according to the government and media, the signs of radicalization is when they become overtly Islamic.
I think also
because I think that's the point that the sister made.
The thing is, there is nothing hidden today. The government is also very overt and clear about what is, radicalization. What does it mean? It says that, look, it says extremism regard Western intervention in Muslim majority countries as a war with Islam. So if anyone actually thinks about the foreign policy of Europe or America as a war on Islam, you are radicalized, you are an extremist. They also say that if anyone thinks like them and us, create a narrative of them and us, their ideology includes the uncompromising belief that people cannot be both Muslim and British at the same time, then you are radicalized, you're an extremist. I know that these things don't actually really fit, with, freedom of belief, freedom of expression, but the government is really overt and really clear about, its intention. It can say that, look, we want to protect British values. But I wanted to say one thing, that these things are not new. If you look at the pre-Islamic Arabia in the time of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the Quraysh were actually involved in venerating many different idols, and they were worshipping different deities. And at that time, Abu Talib was actually approached by the Quraysh, and it was the same thing. Tell your nephew not to attack our values, Qurayshi values. If he attacks our Qurayshi values, then we have a problem, and you must stop your nephew. Similarly, the government today is actually approaching mosques, madrasas, universities, and schools and saying, stop your nephew. And here the nephews are Muslims here, saying that stop them because they are actually questioning British values. When they question British values, what do we mean? We are questioning, these Muslims are actually questioning, democracy. That democracy is a fallacy. It doesn't work, because we saw 2-3 millions of people actually, came out in the streets saying that stop the war in Iraq. The government didn't stop. It didn't even, time and time and again, the government goes out, and bombs and fires against different countries, no matter what, even without United Nations. So when people actually question those things, the government feels threatened. And when the government feels threatened, it actually goes to madrasas under the guise of prevent and CTS and says that stop it, don't talk about it. So basically, in essence, it's saying that political Islam is a no-go area. You should not talk about anything that actually, undermines British foreign policy.
Let me bring in Brother Wakil. He wants to come in, inshallah.
So I think we're talking about prevent. And
specifically what I'm saying is that, look, the more the person becomes Islamic, the more they are radicalized. Because that's according to the government. So overtly, for example, I think the sister gave a very nice example that, if you see that this person starts praying at work, or if it's one of our sisters, then if she is wearing the hijab, then, that's a questionable act, isn't it? Why is she doing that?
The prevent agenda, or the prevent strategy as the government calls it, is built on a number of assumptions. And in my view, and in fact, most right-thinking people would agree, those assumptions are flawed. One of the assumptions is the more Islamic you are, the more of a risk you are to society. Again, we've not seen any empirical evidence to suggest that. There's not been any solid, credible evidence to show, okay, in X number of incidents, you had people who became.
But the point is, the public opinion is there. I think I remember reading something where this woman said, my neighbor, he's become extremist, and they said, why? Because now he goes to Salah, or he kept a beard. These are the public. They are creating public opinion, isn't it? These are the signs of radicalization.
The Nazis used to say, if you repeat a lie frequently enough, it becomes a truth. And this was part of the Nazi propaganda machine. So some would say the Tory government's agenda is probably borrowing some of the Nazi styles, some of their propaganda machinery.
Donald Trump has.
Well, Donald Trump has been very vocal. Obviously, he wants to ban Muslims from America. And you can see how he's still carrying on as a Republican candidate.
Well, recently, only yesterday, if you read the news, you would find that there was a family of 8 or 9, I think. They tried to board a plane, and they were taken out.
They were stopped.
Yeah, they were stopped because they were traveling to America, and they were stopped by the security, whatever security that they have at that in that airport. So you can see that it's actually taking its toll, isn't it?
It is. I wanted to go back to the Cameron's statement actually on what is the government's thinking. What is the real agenda? And I think I really want to try and as much as possible focus on the government's real agenda. The government's agenda, as I said before, is to make sure that Muslims are essentially not practicing Islam in a generation's time. I want to refer to one of Cameron's speeches.
Is it reforming Islam?
That's the agenda. That's the government's agenda. In 2014, when David Cameron gave his speech at the UN, he said, quote, "The root cause of this terrorist threat is a poisonous ideology of Islamist extremism. We must be clear. To defeat the ideology of extremism, we need to deal with all forms of extremism, not just violent extremism." So what you can see from Cameron's speech is that they've come up with this terminology called Islamist extremism. But when you read between the lines, what is clear is that Cameron's problem and his government's problem is not with this so-called Islamism, which, by the way, I still scratch my head thinking, what is this Islamism?
Yeah.
I still haven't figured that out. Call me stupid if you will. In my view, and it is very clear from Cameron's speeches, that the real issue is Islam itself. And how I draw this conclusion is, I was reading Cameron's speech, which he gave in Birmingham on 20th of July, which was almost like a policy speech. And in that, he was talking about this new law that he wants to bring in. It's called the Extremism Bill. And very interesting how Cameron talks about reforming Muslims. So he says, and it's quite. Please bear with me. It's a fairly it's quite wordy. He said, as part of our extremism bill, we are now going to actively encourage reforming and moderate Muslim voices. We can't stand neutral in this battle of ideas. We have to back those who share our values. So here is my offer. If you're interested in reform, if you want to challenge the extremists in our midst, if you want to build an alternative narrative, we are with you and we will back you with practical help, with funding, with campaigns, with protection, and with political representation. End of quote.
So who are the moderate voices that he's talking about?
Well, therein lies the problem, because as far as the government is concerned, it seems that most Muslims are in their default position extremists, but from that 3 million population, he wants to pick out certain Muslims who are what they call moderate Muslims. In other words, people who don't associate themselves with traditional normative Islamic values. And in this statement, what Cameron is saying, if you really...
Do you mean towing the government line?
Yeah, essentially agreeing with what the government wants you to agree with.
As long as you don't oppose the government,
as long as you don't
you're
question,
moderate.
Absolutely. As long as you don't question what the government has to... what the government is doing in the Muslim countries. But if you again, if I deconstruct this statement from Cameron, he is saying essentially is that he's going to bribe those Muslims. He'll give them money. He'll give them publicity. He'll give them support and protection as long as they are willing to promote his agenda. So you can see how the so-called counter-extremism strategy, which is now again part of this wider reformation agenda from the government, this is all designed to ensure that Islam becomes unrecognizable in the next generation.
So who is radicalizing the Muslim youth? Is it foreign policy, government, media, or the wars in the Muslim world?
I think, this is the government and its media machine is definitely radicalizing the Muslims and non-Muslim Islam. In terms of the non-Muslims, radicalization in the sense that they are Islamophobic, they become Islamophobic. They actually hate Islam, hate Muslims.
Oh, they have suspicions, isn't it?
They suspicion, but you can also see their hate. It's something I don't want to actually tar everyone with the same brush. But
there are some non-Muslims that really spoke out. Yeah. I mean, if you go on the media, especially on Twitter and Facebook, you will see the support, the overwhelming support that you get.
Yeah, if you look at this video that went viral, actually, the video in a bus of a woman, a black woman. Sorry to say the color, because I don't know her name, was really having a go at a Muslim woman sitting with a scarf in the bus.
And she was pregnant, actually.
She was pregnant, and she was saying that, I'm going to hit you with my heels of my shoe and, and hit you in your belly and so forth. And these are the things, some of the things that we actually see. If you look at any of the comments that, for example, in BBC News website, that people actually leave behind, for example, after any Islamic story, you'll find the kind of hate, the anger that some of those non-Muslims have. And I think that those anger did not actually come from thin air. Those angers were actually created by the government, created by the government's media machine, and it's those who are responsible.
So you're saying that, look, foreign policy is the thing that is creating extremist views or extremism. Yeah.
No, the thing is, it's not only foreign policy. It's when foreign policy that is really aggressive and murderous, as it is, as we see in Syria, as we see in Iraq or Afghanistan. When people actually oppose those foreign policies, then, for example,
So it's actually having effect of Jeremy Corbyn as well, isn't it?
That's right. So
it's
anyone
having
who
an effect.
opposes those foreign policies, this is why the government has, did come about, the way it has come, under the guise of, terrorism. Because when it actually says the aims of, the aim of prevent strategy, it actually says, it only uses the word terrorism. All you have to do is replace the word terrorism with Islam. And I'm just going to, just read out this definition. It says, the aim of prevent is to respond to the ideological challenge of terrorism. Just replace it with Islam. So it will be, for example, prevent people from being drawn into Islam and ensure that they are given appropriate advice and support, and work with sectors and institutions where there are risks of radicalization, meaning Islamicization. So it just replace the terrorism word with Islam, and that is. So the government's main problem is don't oppose our foreign policy, don't oppose our British values, don't oppose our framework of our society, don't oppose it. Don't talk the truth, basically. And this is exactly why I said in the beginning that in the time of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the same thing happened. Now, I want to actually go back to one of your questions earlier. You said, what are the dangers of prevent? So one of the big dangers of prevent is actually we will find slowly that Muslim might, for example, if not in our generation, but because of the hard hitting by the government in our community, the next generation may actually abandon the core values of Islam as encapsulated in the hadith of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Because one of the things the government wants to definitely crush is the sense of one ummah. Whereas Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam has said, this ummah of yours is a single ummah, and I am your Lord, so worship me. Surah Al-Anbiya.
So one ummah, or the concept of ummah is something which is quite toxic for.
It's very toxic, because when you actually sense the notion of one ummah, you'll definitely talk for your brothers and sisters in Iraq.
The whole concept of brother and sister, that's something that they can fathom, isn't it? Because it's very difficult to stomach, like, look, these guys are British, but then they say the Syrians are their brothers, the Egyptians are their brothers, the Libyans are their brothers. That's a problem, isn't it?
You see, the thing is, long time ago, one of the sheikhs said that, the problem is not Islamophobic. The problem with the British government is truth-phobic. It's really actually truth-phobic, because Islam and Muslims actually stand for universal, brotherhood. They don't actually stand for nationalism and etc. Is what I'm saying. And the government doesn't want people to actually believe in global world as a global place for all the people to live in one place.
So brother Wakil, is there a link between Syria and counterterrorism strategy?
I think we need to, as Brother Mamoon was referring to, we need to look at this issue as a global issue. Of course, you've got some 3 million Muslims living in Britain. But there are more than 1 billion Muslims around the world, and we know that you only have to switch on BBC One news program to understand the chaos that many of the Western armies are causing in Muslim countries.
Mm-hmm.
You just need to look at Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya. You don't need to look too far to see what chaos that's being caused by European and American armies. Now, as far as the government is concerned, you may remember, and again, some of the younger listeners may not remember, but there was something called the War on Terror, which was launched by George W. Bush in 2001 with his friend Mr. Tony Blair. Now, the War on Terror, they very quickly realized, was a very, very dangerous term, and they realized actually this is not selling particularly well. It was a marketing disaster, if I could put it in those terms. What they realized is that we need to replace that terminology.
Name,
yeah. But the policies have been continuing ever since. Now, the government's policies in Britain towards the Muslims through Prevent, the Counter-Terrorism Act, etc., they are actually two sides of the same coin. So, in the Muslim countries, there is something called the War on Terror, and that's dropping bombs on civilian targets. Yes,
identifying extremists, and then you're dealing with them.
Absolutely,
by bombs,
but through bombs. But obviously, those Muslims who are living in Britain, America, Europe, you're not going to drop bombs on them. What you will do is you will threaten them with policies that take away their children, that shuts them up, that labels them as extremists. Essentially, what you do is you shut them up through other means.
Well, there's a heavy sentence, isn't it? I think for extremism, what's the sentence like? What?
Well,
maybe 7-8 years, if not more.
Well, there isn't. I suspect that's the direction it will go. At the moment, people are not imprisoned for being so-called extremists. But if you look at, when I look at the sentencing patterns, whenever Muslims are accused of terrorism-related offences, whenever they are sentenced, they receive very heavy punishment.
Saying that
40 years, 35 years.
Saying that, you said, look, just because they have these views that they're not going to be given, 7-8 years. But we had maybe, I don't know if you can remember, maybe 3-4 years ago, we had this guy on Facebook, and he said all British soldiers should go to hell. And for this, he actually received a sentence. Wasn't that the case?
That's right. In some cases, the prosecution service will treat certain statements as potentially what they call glorifying terrorism. You may remember after 9/11,
that's it. That's
when
the point.
when Charles Clarke became the Home Secretary, he passed a piece of legislation called the Terrorism Act. I believe it was the 2000 Act. And in that act, they made, again, they use these fancy words, glorification of terror. So under that particular banner, you may now be locked up for doing what they call glorifying terrorism.
Let me just quickly move on. How does deradicalization work? Can you talk about that a little bit, the channel thing?
Yes. So, as Sister Ibtihal was touching on this earlier on, channel program, which forms part of the prevent strategy, and is again underpinned by the CTS Act, which we talked about on a number of occasions today. The channel program is coordinated through the local police. And the police now have designated prevent officers who are sort of the coordinators. And what will happen is every school now has against safety. They have a designated prevent officer, and every school is now by law required to what they call give due regard to the prevent obligations. What that means in reality is that they all now give, and actually it's best to give by example, show by example.
How do they read deradicalize? Do they take them away and put them in a program?
They put them through a program.
How does the program work?
It's basically like the child has to attend lectures. It's almost like counseling. Okay. So if I had psychological problems, you would see me seeing a psychiatrist who will be giving me counseling. The channel program, you can see it as a counseling type program where you might find this quite laughable. Many years ago, when people watched films like Minority Report, you had pre-crime report. You had it's just a Hollywood story where someone was about to commit a crime and
you stopped it.
And you stopped it before it happened. And at the time when I watched this, I was laughing. I thought, wow, what a joke.
But good idea though.
To be honest, this is what it is. It is now what we're seeing now is a Minority Report type society where it's being rolled out for the Muslims.
Some would argue, isn't that good? That look, if we can get rid of extremist ideas and prevent these guys from going to ISIS, prevent them from going to Syria, isn't that a good thing?
I think the thing I just want to come in over here. The thing is, without even sometimes channeling people, counseling people, in terms of actually de-radicalizing them, by the mere fact of applying so much pressure on madrasas and mosques. For example, some Muslims unfortunately are already let's quote
deradicalizing. Deradicalized, you mean?
Deradicalizing. Sorry about this. Okay, so I just wanted to actually say something to you. For example, if you actually look at 26th of November this year, BBC News, there's actually a video about Preston Mosque, and it's actually called one of the largest mosques in Preston, and it's called the Quwwatul Islam. And I think someone visited that mosque, and there we found a head teacher by the name of Khalid Ibrahim. Now, the reason why I'm actually naming names because it's public. There is a video actually on it, and he actually said these are some of the dangers when people are put on pressures, and I think we need to actually say to the government and to the media and those people who actually interview us, just like the Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said that if you were to actually put sun in my right hand and the moon in my left hand, I will not actually abandon saying the truth, is what I'm saying, as it is, unless Allah takes my life away, or I will give it. So this is what the Muslims should respond with, that much courage and that much confidence. But unfortunately, some imams are actually coming and saying that, look, there is what we teach in our mosque is actually, there is no difference we find between Islamic values and British values. I mean, this is really
There's no difference,
dangerous ground to actually go to. And he says this is, in my opinion, is clearly incorrect, because British values stands for rule of law, not rule of Allah, democracy, foreign policy, and
Brother Mamun, are they being smart? Because we know even in where we live, which is Tower Hamlets, there's many cases where they've actually invited prevent officers to come in. There were some madrasas, weekend school, that they invited prevent officers to come in.
The thing is,
are they being smart, or is it?
Sometimes, when you actually say that, like, we are being smart, we're going to go through, we're going to actually discuss about Islam in the parliament, but we're also becoming an MP at the same time, also passing laws and rules that are not from Islam. You're not actually smart. You're actually deceiving the people. So, for example, like these mosques, which has to be registered now, they have to, sometimes, put a show, whether genuine or not, that they are actually teaching, for example, like everyone's equal, all sorts of things.
All beliefs are equal. There's no monopoly over beliefs.
All beliefs are equal, and etc. They actually go on to actually say that we are teaching actually what Cameron's big society promotes in terms of integration and community cohesion. There was one sister actually called, she's called Ridwana, from that video. She says that the government needs to tackle radicalization and extremism in social media, not in madrasa. Although she's actually passing the buck to tell the government, look, police the
social
internet,
media,
the social media. It's actually passing the buck to other Muslims who are doing a genuine job, perhaps, is what I'm saying, in exposing the truth. And and actually exposing the fallacy as well. So it's not the right approach to have, is what I'm saying, and it's not actually good tactics. So I think the Muslim needs to actually awaken themselves and actually say that, look, hold on a second. What we are actually, if we are actually devaluing, quote unquote British values, then this is actually wrong, and this is why it's wrong. If we are actually promoting Islam, and if we are Muslim, this is correct, and this is the reason why it's correct. This is the reason why foreign policy is wrong, and this is the reason why establishing Islam in Muslim country is correct, and this is the reason why dictatorship is wrong. And Muslims should not be afraid to actually speak up like this. And like I said, that they need to actually embody the method, the example of Prophet ﷺ when he said, when Abu Talib and Quraysh actually approached him and said that, look, abandon this call, stop degrading the Qurayshi way of life, which was based upon falsehood.
Okay, on a positive note, and I want you brothers to give a positive message to the Muslim community. What would you advise be to our community, and how can they safeguard Islam, and especially our youth? Because we know, Sister Ibtihal gave a couple of examples of, 7-year-old baby, 7 months. It's ridiculous. It's what kind of advice would you give? A positive advice that the ummah can, the community can, take back and work with, really.
Yeah, I mean, a few concluding remarks from me. I think firstly, we need to appreciate that it isn't by accident that Muslims ended up in Britain or Europe. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent us to the European shores, and no doubt there is a plan behind all of that. My message to my community is, we must not give up our sublime values of Islam which are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who created Europe and America and the rest of the universe. We must hold on to our values with patience. It will be challenging, it will be difficult, but we must hold on to those values. Now, I would say we need to have a positive agenda. And I do not want your listeners to go away thinking it's all doom and gloom and it's all dark, and let me pack my bag and go home. I would say we have a positive agenda. We need to do in my view, a number of things, and I'll set out some of them. Firstly, we need to expose the government's false narrative that Islam is the problem. That is the starting point. In fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes Islam as وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. He calls it the mercy to mankind. Yeah, He has sent this deen as a mercy to mankind. So it cannot be a problem. It is the solution. We must promote it as a solution.
Okay.
Secondly, we need to expose the government's colonialist agenda in the Muslim countries, and expose the government's within the government you have radicals like Michael Gove, who are neoconservatives. They are publicly known as neocons. They are the real radicals, and we need to expose them. And I think finally, at a practical level as well, we need to I'm a parent, I have kids who go to school. We need to interact with our children's school teachers, to interact with our neighbors, local businesses, and the wider society, and put a positive agenda. We need to put a positive message about Islam, and inshallah, if we can patiently proceed on this basis, inshallah, I think we will see fruits.
Fantastic. Brother Mamun, your final thoughts?
Yeah, all I'm going to say is that, Allah says in the Quran that, that Allah actually hurls the, truth against the falsehood, and definitely the truth prevails. And I don't think Muslims are actually alone in this idea about speaking against Prevent, speaking against CTS. There are non-Muslims out there who actually have the same view as them, that these things are very undermining, is actually, destroying...
divisive, you mean?
Divisive and destroying community cohesion. A lot of actually will say that, we are trying to build community cohesion, and here the government comes up and, scares the community, and comes up with headlines that divide the community. So work with non-Muslims, work with your Muslim colleagues, be united on this, and definitely Allah is on your side, because Allah does say that, He hurls the truth against falsehood, and definitely falsehood does perish.
Jazakallah khair.
And there's nothing to fear about, inshallah.
Just like to end by thanking our guests for enlightening us on this pertinent topic. I'm sure we have gained and benefited much from these discussions. Jazakallah khair to everyone for listening, and a special thanks to all our listeners again. Hope you can join us next week at Straight Talk. You can follow us on Twitter at Middle Path Radio and continue with the discussion. Also, if there are any topics or issues that you'd like us to cover, please contact us via our Twitter account. Again, thank you for listening to Middle Path Radio. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Middle Path Radio, your number one online Islamic talk station.